Well, thank you for that absolutely fantastic reception. I must admit that I'm doing a lot of talking at the moment to students at schools and at universities, to academics and to teachers of students. And I'm afraid that with my presentations I often have to start by putting up this slide first. And while everybody's saying I have to admit that I am a Brexiteer, that I voted to leave in the referendum, and I think that Britain is going to be a lot better off as a result of our decision. If you don't like that, here is a picture of her. The next thing I do in my talks is I usually step back a bit and say, what is the European Union? And this is the polite version, if you like. What I've done is I've taken the main economic components of the European Union and listed some of the political baggage that comes with it. So, as you're aware, the two things in the European Union we talk about most often are the so-called single market and the customs union. The single market is a free trade area, but it's an unusual one in that it comes with 4 freedoms of movement. Not just goods and services, but also capital, and in particular people. Now, this is very unusual. I mean, plenty of people have free trade deals that don't allow people to move freely from one country to another, not only to work, but also to claim benefits and have all sorts of other rights, pretty much equivalent to those of a local person. Also, the EU single market requires us to apply regulations, not just to our trade with the European Union, but to the whole economy. It also requires us to accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Indeed, this is one of the sticking points at the moment in the negotiations, is that the European Union is expecting us to continue to accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, even after we've left the European Union. And on top of that, we have to make payments towards the EU budget. Again, this is the only significant trade deal anywhere where people have to pay to be a member. On top of that, there's the customs union. One of the key features of the customs union is that although it allows relatively frictionless trade within the European Union, it obliges us to impose the EU's common external tariff on our trade with the rest of the world, and it prevents us from doing our own free trade deals with other countries. We basically have to negotiate as a bloc as part of the European Union. On top of those two things, single market and customs union, there's a whole host of other stuff. There's things like, as I say, reciprocal healthcare, Europol, the police agency, Euratom, the nuclear regulator, Horizon 2020, an educational program, and so on. And there's also a couple of optional bits I've just flagged up as well. It's right down the bottom of the slide, so I'll just tell you what they are. One is the euro, and one is membership of the Schengen area. Neither of which, of course, the UK currently participates in, of course, it hopefully never will. The reason I've mentioned those is that as a Brexiteer, I'm often accused of trying to have my cake and eat it, and say that you can't pick and choose. Well, actually you can. I mean, even within the European Union, you can choose not to be a member of the euro, not to be a member of the Schengen area. So that principle already has gone by the wayside. So there's an awful lot I could say about any of these areas. I could say a lot about migration, for example. I could say a lot about the prospect of deregulating the economy. I could say a lot about the savings we might make on our contributions to the EU budget. But given the time, I thought I'd focus on one particular thing, which is trade, particular free trade. And by that I mean our future relationship with the European Union, but also, of course, the possibilities that leaving the European Union opens up for our trade with the rest of the world. But focusing on plans for our relationship with the European Union, I set out essentially 4 possibilities here: Plan A, B, C, and D. I'm sure we could go ahead all the way down the alphabet. Plan A is what I think would be the ideal scenario, which is that we obviously leave the single market and the customs union in March 2019, and then we immediately implement a comprehensive free trade deal with the EU that maintains pretty much the same sort of frictionless trade as we have now, but without all the baggage of the free movement of people and the contributions to the budget and so on. Realistically, though, I think it's unlikely that we're going to get that. There's still an awful lot of work that needs to be done before then, and our EU negotiating partners don't look very willing to offer us this sort of deal yet. Plan B seems to be what Her Majesty's government is currently aiming for. This was hinted at in the Prime Minister's Foreign speech in particular. So that's the idea that we retain the main benefits of the single market and the customs union, whatever they might be, during a time-limited transition period, perhaps of 2 years. And then at the end of that 2-year period, we move to a comprehensive free trade deal. Problems with that, though, as well. We may well accept some of the benefits, but also the obligations. The EU is not going to give us a free ride here. So I suspect they will be stuck with some of that baggage that membership of both the single market and the customs union requires. Time-limited transition periods as well. Makes me nervous. Transition periods have a habit of becoming permanent. Who knows what might happen in 2 to 3 years' time? What might happen in the next election? What nearly happened at the last one, for example? Think about that. There's another alternative, which I guess is going to get even bigger boo in this room, which is the idea of using Article 50 actually to delay Brexit for a fixed period. Article 50 would allow us to say that we're going to remain a full member of the European Union for a couple of years longer. This does at least have the advantage of clarity. We don't have to worry about which parts of the single market and the customs union we're going to take, which parts we're going to leave, then leave with a free trade deal. But I think politically this is unacceptable. This is not Brexit. It's not what people voted for. So that leads me to the fourth option, the clean break in March 2019, or no deal, as some people describe it. What does no deal mean? You may well have heard some of this morning. Apologies if I'm going over the same ground. It essentially means that we would trade with the European Union in future under the existing rules of the World Trade Organization, as of course a great many countries successfully do. And the US trades essentially under these rules. So does China. And I bet you any of you could find something in this room with Made in China stamp on it. They managed to do it. Why can't we? It would mean that the European Union would impose their common external tariff on UK exports to the EU. That's clearly a negative. But that tariff averages out at only 5%. It is bigger for some sectors, including agriculture, but the average is only 5%. And the biggest scheme of things, that's not a lot. In fact, it's been more than offset by the fall in the value of the pound since the referendum. That's not a game changer. There is a question of what the UK would do in terms of its tariffs on imports from the European Union. I'm sure many of you are readers of the Guardian. So what I've seen this morning that UK households will be, I think, £920 a year worse off because of what the government would decide to do here, which is to impose tariffs on imports from the European Union. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but I would just stress there is an alternative, which is to remove tariffs on our trade with the rest of the world, which is what would be consistent with the so-called most favoured nation rules. I'll come back in a second. It is true that UK exports to the European Union would face stricter customs checks than they do now, and that might be a problem particularly for supply chains, just-in-time supply chains and so on. But it's worth stressing that both sides have a very strong interest here in keeping that trade moving as freely as possible. By definition, if there's a supply chain involving somebody British at one end, there's somebody German or French or Belgian or whoever at the other end who wants to sell us stuff. So there's a clear economic interest in keeping those relationships moving smoothly. Plus, there's no real excuse for imposing big customs checks because we're starting from a position where our goods are produced under the same rules as the rest of the European Union. There is various areas where the impact is uncertain because there are plenty of areas which are not covered by the WTO, particularly services. So we could hear many stories about what this might mean for aviation, financial services and so on. So we would have to do some form of agreement in those areas to continue trading on a similar basis that we do now. And the answer is they use some really fancy econometric modelling that, as a trade economist, actually even I don't fully understand. But I get the basic ideas. One is particular. They often rely on something called a gravity model. It's a nice intuitive idea. It's become very popular in economics. And if you think about planets, planets moving around each other. What determines the gravitational forces between those planets? One is how big that other planet is, and the other is how close it is to you. And people have applied this idea to economics and said you trade a lot more with big countries who are close to you. That's actually quite a reasonable argument. But they put too much weight on these things. Increasingly, of course, we're producing small things that can be traded around the world. If I pick up my iPhone, for example, the chances that's being made in Europe are very approximately zero. It's a small thing, easily shipped around the world. Gravity models are pretty much irrelevant. We're talking about services. It doesn't matter how close somebody is. If they've got an internet connection, they could be in India or down the road. So gravity models, I think, make too much of size and importance to you because of how close they are. These models also tend to look at averages. So they're based, for example, on the experience of a group of countries that includes Luxembourg. So if Luxembourg leaves the European Union, that will be devastating for its economy, because frankly, Luxembourg, the only economy it's got is the European Union. Well, one of the most successful people in Luxembourg is Juncker. Basically, I mean, he's the equivalent of the mayor of Bristol. So, the mayor of Bristol telling the rest of us what to do. I hope there's nobody from Bristol here, I'm sorry. So, we're not Luxembourg, we're the world's 5th biggest economy. A global trading superpower, financial centre, and so on and so on. We can do much better. And these models also assume that we go back to square one. We go right back to the 1970s. We lose all the benefits from the convergence of regulation, economic integration that's already taken place. That we go back to square one. Now, it may well be that we want to drop much of the regulations that the EU has imposed. We certainly would want to drop as far as the domestic economy is concerned. But the reality is we are already very closely integrated with the European economy, and that's not going to change just because we're leaving the single market. And then finally, there's all sorts of absolutely outrageous project fear stories. I mean, I just listed 3 here. Planes won't fly. Planes will cease to fly, March 2019. This is truly outrageous. Cancer patients will be denied life-saving drugs. This is a Guardian classic list. We're no longer be able to import medical isotopes from Europe. 75,000 city jobs lost. The actual story was up to 75,000 jobs lost. Up to is a very, very powerful couple of words. It won't be near that. So why am I more positive? First of all, the language here is important. No deal sort of implies nothing at all, that there's no continuing relationship with Europe at all. But there are other ideas. I think it was David Davies who quoted the idea of a bare bones Brexit. Perhaps he was thinking of the fact that he was presenting this idea to Cabinet on Halloween, so the idea of a skeleton was quite appropriate. What that means in practice, I think, is that we would quit the single market and the customs union in 2019. But we'd replicate the other arrangements that actually don't require EU membership. They're not conditional on being a member of the single market or a customs union. I can give many examples of this, but why do I think it's likely to happen? First of all, these relationships are typically mutually beneficial. They're good for us, but they're good for the European Union as well. A prime example of this is the planes won't fly idea. Are you seriously telling me that Spain will make it harder for British tourists to fly to the Costa del Sol and prevent their own airlines from flying to the UK, which is the biggest single aviation hub in Europe? No, that's just not going to happen. There are a great many precedents as well. People say that, we're going to be leaving Euratom. We won't be contributing, won't be a participant in nuclear regulation. Lots of countries operate very closely with Euratom, including, as it happens, China. China is a major contributor to Euratom programs. As far as I'm aware, China is not a member of the European Union. It's not even in Europe, and yet somehow they managed to do a deal. And are we really saying that our European partners and friends will prevent cancer patients from accessing medical isotopes because of some technicality about the Euratom Treaty? Some Remainers say that, but doesn't that tell you a lot about Europe, if they seriously think that's a possibility? Would we really want to be a member of a club under those conditions? Clearly not. We also, of course, wouldn't be starting from scratch. It's often said to me, it takes Europe 10 years to do a trade deal. It will take them 10 years to do a trade deal with us. 2 points on that. First of all, God, it takes them 10 years. We can do it a lot quicker than that, first of all. But secondly, it takes them 10 years because they're starting with countries they don't have an existing trading relationship with. We do. We're already a member of the single market and customs union. A lot of trade between the two of us. And then finally, some things simply don't require a formal deal. For example, citizens' rights. I think the government's made quite a reasonable offer, actually, on citizens' rights to the European Union. They seem reluctant to accept it. If we have a no-deal scenario, let's just make that offer. Let's make it unilaterally. Would Europe reciprocate? Why wouldn't they? You know, if we're being generous towards EU citizens here, why wouldn't they be generous to our citizens there? Particularly as, of course, take the Spanish example, how much British people living in Spain are contributing to the economy there. And I could even argue that no deal would be the optimal scenario. I mean, it would provide the clarity and certainty that businesses want. You know, I speak to lots of people who say, look, we don't actually care what happens in March 29, as long as you tell us now and get on with it. We can live with these tariff and non-tariff barriers. Just tell us what's going on. And of course, a clean break in 2019 would allow us to crack on and start to benefit from Brexit straight away. We could immediately start doing our trade deals and so on. We could immediately start liberalising the economy, and we'd start saving straight away on our contributions to the EU budget, with none of us faffing around about what the divorce bill might be. That's my more positive take on no deal. I just want to dwell a bit though on this tariff choice issue. When we leave the European Union, if we don't have a free trade deal in place, we do have this choice between imposing tariffs on imports from the EU or reducing tariffs on imports from the rest of the world. And this was the basis of the Guardian story today. I prepared this slide before I saw that. Here are some slightly different numbers, but also from an impeccably left-wing source, the Resolution Foundation. And they've calculated that on average, if we impose tariffs on our trade with the European Union, we would be £260 a year worse off. And that's the figure that they led with. If you wade through the 50 pages of their report, you'll see pretty much the footnote that says, oh, of course, we could reduce our tariffs on imports from the rest of the world. On average, UK households would then be £130 a year better off. Now, what amazes me is there's a debate about this. I mean, why would you not go for the reducing tariff option? I know the two answers that I give. One is that it would expose UK producers to more competition. The agricultural sector in particular might face bigger challenges under this scenario. But think about this. What we're essentially asking people to do is consumers to subsidise producers. If we do want to subsidise agriculture, and I think there's a reasonable case for doing so, let's do so explicitly. Let's subsidise agriculture for whatever we want to subsidise agriculture for, so as guardians of the environment and so on. But if at the end of the day, somebody wants to buy lamb from New Zealand, why do we have a quota on that? And why do we impose a tariff above that quota? And I think it's one of the advantages of Brexit, is it really shines a light on all of these idiocies. The alternative being that people end up paying even more to subsidise producers. We should put consumers first. If there are some producers that need compensating one way or another, fine, let's do that through the tax system or whatever. But let's not expect UK consumers to pay to protect UK producers. And the other argument is that if we reduce our tariff barriers unilaterally, we give up the bargaining chip in our negotiations. Maybe there's something in that. But suppose we do give up these tariffs, and as a result, British consumers are a lot better off and the economy thrives. Isn't that just simply sending a signal to our partners that what they're doing is daft? But the idea, I mean, honestly, going to an average UK household and saying you're going to have to pay £260 a year more than you would otherwise have done in order to give this set of bureaucrats a bit of extra bargaining power in hypothetical negotiations. No, let's just take the money, redistribute it, some of it is necessary. We'll be better off, and that will be a beacon of free trade for the rest of the world at a particularly important time. I mean, protectionism is on the rise generally. Let's not contribute to it. Let's actually take a bold step ourselves and start lowering some of these tariffs. I would say, by the way, that that would be a particular benefit to developing countries at the moment. One of the worst things that the European Union does is requires us in the UK to impose tariffs on imports, for example, of oranges and coffee and cocoa. Now, even with global warming, it's going to be a long, long time before we're producers of those goods. We're protecting Spanish farmers, or bizarrely, the German coffee processing industry. It's just really, really odd things to be doing. So even if you don't believe in unilateral free trade across the board, we can at least start by reducing these tariff barriers on developing countries. And that's a win-win. It's a win for us because we get cheaper imports, and it's a win for them because they get a chance to trade their way out of relative poverty rather than relying on aid. Now, I personally believe in trade and aid, but if you want, this is trade instead of aid, and I think that's a lot better. So finally, I'm going to dwell a little bit on the money because I think this is actually the biggest sticking point in the negotiations at the moment. In principle, there are three. There's citizens' rights, but I think we've essentially made the right offers there. I think that's essentially done. Northern Ireland, I think, is essentially done as well. The sticking point, of course, is the money. And as was suggested in the introduction, it's clear the UK is on very strong legal ground if it walks away without paying a penny. I mean, this is simply because Article 50 says that the EU treaties cease to apply in March 2019. The treaty obligations include all financial commitments, so we can walk away without paying a penny, and indeed we should actually get some money back because we've got capital, for example, investing in the European Investment Bank. When I first tweeted the suggestion that we owe nothing, I think about 90% of my followers agreed. 10% violently disagreed, and that's because they thought we would do 10 or 20 billion pounds. I think legally they're right. So if we do decide to pay anything more than zero or a refund, we have to be getting something in return. So far, the Prime Minister has made what I think is actually very generous contributions until the end of 2020. The significance of the 2020 deadline is that's the end of the EU budget period. They have these very complicated multi-annual financial frameworks. They run from 2014 to 2020. So if you think about the analogy of a gym membership, you sign up for a given period. Just because we've decided to leave a bit early, arguably we should continue to pay our membership period until the end. It's a reasonable argument, particularly if it covers some sort of transitional period. I think it's also reasonable to chip in a little bit for the pensions of EU officials. I mean, like it or not, they were working for us. But you can see here, I get to a figure of maybe £25 billion, call it €30 billion. But that's conditional on getting something back. I must stress that. However, our EU friends are asking for significantly more. It's hard to pin down exactly what basis this is done on, but there are two specific things. One is they wanted to continue contributing to spending that might take place after 2020. This, by the way, suspiciously has a French term, rest à liquider. But anyway, the fact it's French immediately makes me suspicious. But anyway, the thing that annoys me here is that a lot of this, by the way, is contingent. This is money that's been promised very vaguely on the assumption that the respective national government would chip in as well and facilitate the spending. So it's all hypothetical anyway. And it's spending that takes place years after we've left. And the reality is that the European Union is losing its second biggest net contributor. Germany is the biggest net contributor, then the UK, and then some way behind us, France, because of course they get massive agricultural subsidies. So they have to start cutting their cloth already to allow for the fact that we're leaving. So I think paying any money that might be paid out after 2020 is ludicrous. And then there's these upfront payments for contingent liabilities. So basically the idea is we as a shareholder in the European Investment Bank, have made lots of loans to countries like Ireland and Portugal. And the idea is if Ireland and Portugal go bankrupt, then somebody's got to cover the shortfall. But the European Union wants us to pay up front for this possibility. So against the possibility of Ireland going bankrupt, they want us to give them 20 billion now. We'll get it back, of course, in 10, 20, 30 years' time. No sensible business would run this way. I think the simple thing is just to leave our capital in the European Investment Bank. It's earning money. It's a goodwill gesture to do so. But I'll just come back to the first bullet here. If we don't get anything in return, then we should walk away and not pay. So briefly then, my conclusions. I think Brexit is all about getting the trade-offs right. It's making the most of the freedoms that Brexit will provide. For example, free trade with the rest of the world and liberalising the economy. While minimising any harm to our relationship with the European Union. It is a fact that the European Union is our biggest single export market. We currently do have almost frictionless trade with them. So I think it's realistic to recognise that we won't be doing quite as much trade with them as we would otherwise have done. But of course, over time, the European Union is going to be less and less important. It's already less than 50% of our trade. It's going to become less and less important as the rest of the world grows more quickly. So I think the chances of us making a gain from that are very high. I think our benefits will outweigh any short-term costs. I do think, personally, a transitional period will be helpful. There is an awful lot that needs to be done over the next year or so. We simply may not be ready for 2019. Sorry? So I didn't catch that. Oh, I'll come back to you and make a Q&A. But I do think also that no deal is a second best, probably quite a close second best, rather than the worst case that people talk about. And I quite like the springboard analogy rather than cliff edge. Language here is very important. It's like when you argue in favour of austerity, you're on a loser straight away. I argue with people like Oxfam, who are the anti-poverty lobby. And so if you're arguing with Oxfam, you must logically be pro-poverty. You're simply arguing about a different way of reducing the problem of poverty. I don't like cliff edge because that implies you jump off and go crash. I do like springboard. That's partly because it allows for the possibility initially there's a dip. And I think the economy has grown a little bit more slowly than otherwise have done as a result of Brexit. So you get a little bit of a dip, but then you take off. I think that's what would happen. And it may well be that a no deal and a clean departure in 2019 allows us to get that lift off sooner than we would otherwise have done. So, as I said at the beginning, unusually for an economist, I am optimistic about the prospects, the opportunities that Brexit creates. I think the British public made the right decision. We should get on with negotiating the best possible deal that we can, but at the end of the day, if the European Union doesn't want to offer us a deal for whatever reason, we should walk away and start maximising the benefits straight away. Thank you.